So, hello and welcome to the Poetry Soundbite, a new series of poetry readings and interviews available at As It Ought to Be magazine. I'm Chase Dimock, managing editor of As It Ought to Be magazine, proud to host our first installment of the series with Mike James. In a quick and tidy 30 minutes, we will learn a little bit about Mike, hear some of his poems, and explore how he crafts his work. Our poem selections and questions came from my students in my Intro to Poetry class, who are helping me put together these interviews as part of our Living Poet project. I thought this would be a good way to teach poetry as a living, vital art form, and so that they could get to know actual living poets. A big shout out tonight to Luna Tellez, Kai Carabona, Arvindavaya Silberman, and Sinead Goldberg, who contributed tonight's questions. So our guest tonight is Mike James. Here's a little bit about Mike. Mike James has published widely in places such as Plain Songs. Hey, I'm in Plain Songs too. Laurel Poetry Review, Birmingham Poetry Review, Gargoyle, and Tar River Poetry. His poetry collections include Parades from Alien Buddha, Jumping Drawbridges in Technicolor from Blue Horse, Crows in the Jukebox from Bottom Dog, and My Favorite House Guest on Future Cycle. He has served as the associate editor of the Kentucky Review, of Autumn House Press, and of the Good Works Review, as well as the publisher of the now defunct Yellow Pepper Press. He currently serves as an associate editor of the prose poem journal Unbroken. His 18th collection, 18, that is very prolific, Leftover Distances, is forthcoming from Luchador Press. A multiple pushcart nominee, Mike has read and lectured at festivals and universities throughout the country. He is a strong supporter of cats, literacy, coffee, white wine, top hats, crows, and free-range poetics. He is an opponent of plaid, rigidity, salads, and quiet parakeets. He currently makes his home right outside of Nashville. So, Mike, thank you for coming tonight. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Chase. I'm really excited to be your inaugural poet. This should be a lot of fun. I'm excited to read some poems and to answer some questions from your students. So really been looking forward to this.
Awesome. I've noticed, by the way, some intermittent flashes of light out your window. Is there a lightning storm or are those just cars?
It is a lightning storm. Yes.
Awesome.
So the fireworks will be sponsored by Nature for the next half hour. So hopefully everything will be maintained and we will be able to keep connectivity throughout.
Excellent, because there's kind of like a Goethe-style pathetic fallacy romanticism going out your window to the left there.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So anyway, again, thank you so much for agreeing to be the first poet and to essentially be my guinea pig, because as a professor, my technical abilities are limited. So we'll see what happens and if this comes together.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I want to start in with some poems and also some questions from my students. And I want you to read, because this was the most popular one so far, your poem, Water and Dirt, Darkness and Reaching. And then I have a couple of questions from my students.
Okay, yep, happy to read that. Just to preface the couple ones I'm gonna read, these are all in the first section of my upcoming book, Leftover Distances, which Luchador will publish in March of 2021. All of the poems in this first section and the ones that I'll read tonight are formal ones, and not formal in the English tradition, but formal in the Persian tradition. They're Americanized versions of a form popularized by Rumi. Now, there are numerous ways to pronounce this form, and I say this because I have read these poems and have always had someone come up to me and correct my pronunciation after the reading. So they can be pronounced ghazals, ghazals. I always go with the pronunciation of Robert Bly, who wrote some of the best ghazals in the English language. So I always defer to him despite corrections from other people. So that's just a little word in terms of the form. But the whole idea behind it is that the poems are thematically joined together, but all the couplets will stand by themselves. But really the focus is on the leap between the images and between the lines, but thematically they should work together. But this poem that you reference is called Water and Dirt, Darkness and Reaching. I sold my boat because I was afraid of drowning. One way I handle fear is to add distance. I can run fast across the field if a bear is chasing. I imagine many bears. The first time I swam in a river, I worried about silt, drowning on dirt. Yes, it happens. Leaves gather in the river along with rainwater, beer bottles, and lusty curses from men. I only walk on nights when every star is out. There's nothing romantic about that. My fear of the dark as deep as my height. All I know of the stars is the light they bring. As a child, if I called in the night, no one came. That's not true. Darkness came and stayed. I learned to whistle then. A cousin told me whistling keeps fear away. I fall into a well and fear keeps me there. The well rope is the one string instrument I play. The music I make just for me. I gave up whistling years ago. It rings in my ears.
So definitely gets poetry snaps. So I got a couple of questions from my students. So I'm going to ask both of them. You can kind of engage with the parts of it that inspire you. So first one is from Luna, and she wrote, I personally really love the poem Water and Dirt, Darkness and Reaching. And I was wondering, in the last two lines of the poem, you mentioned that you fall into a well and the rope is the one string instrument you play. When you say you play it rather than mention that you attempt to climb out of there with the rope, does that instill the idea that fear is not built into the well, and rather it is the one place where there is no fear other than for the dark? Actually, I like that so much. I want you to just concentrate on that, and then I'll ask you Kai's later.
Okay. Just as a little bit of background, when I'm writing anything, I tend to start always with a phrase or an image, and the poem really seems to be driven from that. I almost never start with an idea for a poem. The image and the sound of the image is really what drives behind it. The thing, the concepts are really flowing from the imagery. And I try very hard to not have any preconceived notion of where I want the poem to go. One of the things that I love about this form is it really, if the poem is successful, pushes you to let go of your logical life and embrace the associative. And it can force you to really go in other directions that maybe if you were following a more linear fashion, you would be afraid of. And I've always said that if we're not pursuing our fear, then we're probably not doing the best writing that we can. So the well forming, I hate to try to explain images and meaning, but I will tell you that the whole idea behind that, or what I think I was going at as I was writing it, was that we the best that we can do is to embrace our fear and to realize that we have many cells that we are operating from, that most of us can lead very compartmentalized lives. And it's important to recognize that the hero on one day can be the villain on the next. And that really, to me, is what the poem is about, that recognizing what's in the dark and the dark that's within.
And that covers a little bit of also what Kai was asking in her question as well. And I really like the fact she talked about how she relates to it. So she wrote that She liked it because she could relate to it on a personal level, and that while reading it through multiple times, she kept a sense of anxiety.
Hmm.
And that, as she says, I noticed that in the last stanza of the piece, you mention how fear keeps you in this well you've fallen into.
Mhm.
And does this represent anything specific? I think you've said a little bit about that. But is this well perhaps acting as a comfort zone of sorts, or acting as a safe space to go into in order to distance yourself from situations that have the potential to make you anxious? Rather than being a safe space, is it somewhere where you feel stuck? I would love to hear you go in depth about what this well signifies in your life. So you've already said a little bit of that, but I like how Kai is looking at how, maybe it's not an either or, maybe it's both, that sometimes the most comfortable places are also places we might be a little stuck in.
Mhm. Yeah, and let me say, this is very important to me. Um, the I in my poems is not Mike James.
Mhm,
The I is a creation. That
mhm.
I am a firm believer in Rimbaud's notion that the I is another. So
Je est un autre.
yeah, yeah,
I had to do that. Sorry.
yeah, and no, it's good. But I bring this up because I've had so many people come up to me and say, "When do you suffer from this?" And the the poem, if it is effective, occupies a different space. It occupies some ideal plane that I do not always have access to. Um, so when I think about the well, um, away from that plane, I'm looking at it and I'm seeing anxiety. I'm seeing people that maybe live in fear and occupy that fear, um, but that are aware of the exploration in the darkness.
Mhm,
And I think that that's a duality that's in all of us. That we are always in the process of overcoming our fear.
mhm,
Um, regardless of how old we are or of how many phobias we possess.
mhm.
So um, that's, I think, the best answer that I could give to it.
Well, I really like what you just said about the fact that I is not necessarily me in a poem, and that's a hard thing. Something I'm trying to figure out more as a professor, how to write prompts that specify that not everything a poet says is here is my absolute truth,
Mhm.
but that more maybe the better way to phrase it sometimes is the speaker, and that
Yes.
I am taking on the persona
Mhm.
of another. And that's something personally as a writer I struggle with at times when I write an I that's not me. And I
Mhm.
think, man, if I put that on the internet, everybody's going to say, look at that jerk.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you
But
okay?
yeah, right, right, exactly. So I keep finding myself eventually putting myself into poems, but like I listen to this person as they said,
Mhm.
just so that people know it's not me. But
Yeah.
let's go on to the second poem, Falling as We Go.
Okay. Okay. And this is falling as we go. And I start with a quote from the great American poet John Berryman, and it's uneasy at last. Uh, it's falling as we go. You go swimming with a smooth stone on your back, heavy, but fits well. Maybe call the stone once. Better yet, at your midpoint, call it years. What do you give up in middle age? Desire? No, it lingers and won't leave. It is a stain that stays, or a knife kept loose in a sheath, an uncertain blade. We take smaller steps as we age, pretend that's a dance. In a way, it is. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's a shuffle habit makes. Curse the night, it doesn't change. The moon's $50 remains unspent. The dark gives cheap cover for want. Ask old man Lot. It was always like this. Your hands tell what's real, true when young and now. Gravity no longer a friend. If you fall, you find what's near. Sometimes you call out. Sometimes you keep still.
Awesome. And when you said 2 steps forward and 1 step back, I couldn't help but hear Paula Abdul come together because opposites attract.
I understood.
DJ's, yeah, okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
so for my students, Paula Abdul was a singer before she was doing these commercials for arthritis medication.
And you can also go with the Springsteen song, 2 steps up and 1 step back, which is steps up, but still same concept.
I needed somebody from a previous generation to explain that one to me. What can I say? I'm a millennial. So, so here's a question. So Arvind Devaya says, I noticed that in the poem, the metaphor of the moon is used as a personification of the part of ourselves that has deep desires and misery within it. I wanted to know what was meant by the dark gives cheap cover for want, and whether I was mistaking what the moon means here. Also, if you could explain what is meant in the last final 2 lines, that'd be great.
Okay. So in terms of the dark gives cover for want, I think I think that's intended as a little bit more of a noir feel that I think we can always look at the back alleys and the neon lights that are missing some lights on the sign as places that people can hide and can whisper their desires, and that's, I think, more than anything what was the catalyst behind that. There are certain things people will say in the dark, whether it's in bed with a loved one or in an alley with a stranger, that they won't say in the daylight, that they won't say in the too bright world. So I think that was probably the catalyst from it. In terms of the last 2 lines, since I'm speaking to much younger people, gravity no longer your friend, or no longer a friend. Wrinkles, stretch marks, all of those things are caused by the weight of however many years pulling down on people. So that's a very literal interpretation from that. And I will say the ending in part came from a conversation that I had with a poet who's mentored me, who's now in his 80s. And it's wonderful to have older friends and younger friends, because your older friends teach you how to age. And he has led a wonderful life, and he's a stunning poet, and is writing some of his best work now. But he's told me on more than one occasions, if you get a call about me tomorrow and I'm not here, it's okay. It's been a good ride. I've done what I wanted to do. And he says that, but then, damn, he gets up and he writes these poems that I have a new one of his on my desk that he just sent me. And you think, you know what? You're containing both of these selves at the same time, that you're completely comfortable with your death, but you're still getting joy out of living. So I don't know if that explains the lines, but it does serve as a catalyst, not just for the last 2 lines, but really for the poem itself.
Yeah, well, it's like what we were saying about Lawrence Ferlinghetti before we started the show, that somebody can have just the most amazing life, but you're still sad when they go.
Absolutely.
But it's not a tragic sad. It's you got to say goodbye sad.
Yeah, it's funny when my friend's time does come, I will be sad because I will miss his conversations, and I will be sad because I will no longer have poems appearing in my mail periodically, or books of his that I push on other people. But I will not be sad for all the great work that he's done, and the friends that I've made because of him, and the hundreds of books I've read because of him. So, and I will just hope that I'm able to do that for someone else.
It's the sadness you feel when you finish a really good book and
Mhm.
you realize there's no more book.
Yeah, it's funny. I have read all of Truman Capote, with the exception of The Grass Harp. And I dearly love Truman Capote. But I have held off on reading The Grass Harp because I have loved him so much and for so long, and he has been so important to me that it pains me to think that there is no more.
There's no,
That so I may go to my grave having never read that, or there may come a time at some
Mhm.
point where I think, it's okay. I can give up the rereading, and I can say goodbye to Truman. So
Perhaps like on your deathbed, your last act will be laying down a copy of The Grass Harp on the bedstand and just going to sleep. And at that point, Mike James is done.
So I will tell you, and this is a little off subject, but it relates to it. John Irving, the World According to Garb Fellow,
Mhm.
and Cider House Rules Fellow for some of your students, is a devotee of Charles Dickens, and you can see this, if you read Dickens and read Irving. He has read all of Dickens except for Dombey and Son. However, he has copies of that novel in every room of his house, including the bathrooms, because he said that he cannot say goodbye to Dickens.
Wow.
Um, but he has them all over his house in case he ever gets a phone call from the doctor that says, "We've got bad news," or something along those lines, so that he can sit down and finish Dickens in his life. And
Wow.
I just love that story about Irving, that writers can be that important to us, that we
Mhm.
can we can plan the time of our death based on our love for someone we've never met that was here before us and will be gone after us. So that endless
Wow.
conversation, I just find thrilling.
Wow. Yeah, I'd like to think that maybe at some point in my life I could have a little bit of that influence. But so let's go to the third poem, which is Drunk Butterflies Near the Missouri River.
Drunk butterflies near the Missouri River. Lord, even without belief, today is enough. A little chant I say to myself. Structured right, it is a hymn. Not even I like to hear my singing. Yesterday, I almost got lost going home. I wasn't following the advice of every teacher. Pay attention. I got through school, got home. I drive when I'm lonely, take a lot of back dirt roads. Never found a collapsed bridge in any river. My luck. That's what keeps me driving. It's August. Heat takes up everything. I think of weather, think of rain. Nothing changes. It's still August, with or without the river. I've always lived beside a river, never once hopped across on rocks. I distrust currents, don't like darkness moving fast or slow. We'll walk a long way to take a good bridge. I've heard every cliche about home is true. I'll say that, smile stupidly. I don't always watch how hard the wind blows. I keep going. I go.
Excellent.
Thank you.
So here's a question from Shanae, and she wrote, in your poem, Drunk Butterflies Near the Missouri River, I couldn't help but feel a somber sadness throughout reading it. Almost to say, there's a distinct feeling of separation that comes with growing older, being at peace with your life as you evolve, but still missing what was. The end of your poem allows me to acknowledge what I think is a simplistic appreciation for where you came from. Because of my perception of this poem and the complexity of dual emotions that come with it, I have to ask, what was the defining moment that allowed you to be at peace with the mourning of your past self? What made you understand complex feelings of sadness and peace? My God, that's better than any question I've ever asked you in one of our interviews. I think Shanae should
That's a
be in
great
charge of
question.
your next interview.
Yeah, that is a great question, um, and I appreciate such a insightful reading of the poem. I will say you really hit on something. This is a pandemic poem. Um, that the I that I write is not I in most instances, uh, but sometimes part of it is, and part of this one definitely is. The poem is dedicated to the poet and publisher Jason Ryberg, um, who, who is known and loved by many of us. But this past summer, um, I had been corresponding with Jason a bit, and I was really mourning all the things that I was missing from the pandemic. I was missing uh, readings and workshops and just visits with friends that I had planned to go see Jason and a lot of other good folks out of Missouri. And it really got me thinking about the landscape that I was missing. And that was really the catalyst from this. That I love Jason, and he is the character in the poem rather than I am.
Mhm.
It's there's a lot of me in the character, but he was really the catalyst behind it because I was missing being able to sit and see what odd things he had to say over a fire or over coffee or a beer or something. Um, and that was really the driving force behind this one.
I can weigh in there too because Jason was the publisher of my book as well, so I was corresponding with him over the summer. And I've never got to meet him in person, just
Mm.
through correspondence and then Zoom readings. But like I've enjoyed the fact that I mean, he's a hell of a character,
Yeah, yeah,
and
he is.
a great patron of literature because he's published so many great books, including a couple of poets you'll meet later this semester. But yeah, you're right. The poetry is a community,
Mhm.
and missing out on that aspect of it, um yeah, it's the electrifying feeling of being in a room and performing and not having that, is I agree, it's there's a diminishing feeling of that.
To me, this is something that I wish I had been told when I was 20. So let me impart wisdom to my younger self. You know, when you're a new writer and you're really passionate about poetry and you love reading it and you love hearing it, and you love writing it. If you're ambitious, you think success is grants or tenure or prizes, and at one level it is. It is.
I definitely want my tenure.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, but yeah, all those things are wonderful. I'm not one to slide anyone from an envy standpoint. But what I will say, one of the great things about poetry and about all the arts is that in what other community can you show your true self and be welcomed? Can you let your guard down? That it would, and we have our work life and we have our family life. We have the different faces that we put on for the world. The arts community loves you no matter what. The arts community loves you better than your mama because at the end of the day, there's always someone um, who's going to uh, relate to what you're doing from a formal standpoint, from a going down the rabbit hole of fear standpoint, and this pandemic has been painful just from the having a beer standpoint
Yeah.
and sitting around a fire or a coffee table. So to me, that's really that's why we do all this, or one of now in the top 5 reasons why we do this, to be a part of this community that when we sit down to write, we are talking with Homer and Sappho, okay, and we're talking with Virgil and Shakespeare, but we're also talking to Jason Ryberg, who is a hell of a guy.
Yeah, I totally am with you on that. That connection with others is why you write, whether it's a friend of yours or the idea that it might be remembered in little bits and pieces like Sappho's poetry.
Mhm.
So we got time for one more poem and one more question.
Okay.
And this poem is Discount Ghazals. Notice how I pronounce that differently.
Yes.
Discount Ghazals of Everyday Saints.
Okay. Well, I will go with your pronunciation. I always defer.
I am the one with a PhD. You know?
It's true. It's true.
Yeah. No, I have no idea if that's the right pronunciation.
Well, I defer to Robert Bly, but I know you have studied with Angela Davis, so I will. So Discount Ghazal of Everyday Saints. We might forage for backdoor secrets and elevator shoes, decorate our houses and flea market drapery to resemble a penny arcade. It's all done for emphasis. Sometimes we wish we stayed as we were born, naked, careless of fat lines. Some of us age into palm readers and call our fingerprints our greatest gifts. Once, I knew a man who claimed he was double crossed by angels and garbage men. Every whisper resembled a yell. Despite it all, his mouth was framed by smile lines. My town is known for orphanages, plus street corners occupied by sword swallowers. The last circus left months ago. Go by the unemployment office. There's always a line. Most of my friends live with hallucinations. Reality is where they put their emphasis. When we gather, we count gifts, naked or draped in the curtains of Scarlett O'Hara.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
So we got time for one more question if you answer quickly.
Sure. Okay.
So this one also came from Shanae, and I wanted to include this because your new book is going to be a lot of ghazals. And I think that that's an interesting form. And she picked up on the ghazal form as well. So she wrote, your writing is very aesthetically pleasing to the eye, minimal and simplistic. When you decided you wanted to write ghazal poems, did you already have the subjects in mind for which you wanted to write about? Or did you decide on the subject after choosing the type of structure you were writing? Aside from that, what was the main inspiration that pushed you in the direction of ghazals to begin with? And that's a question I've asked you before as well.
Yeah, and it's a great question. Two very quick answers. Number one, from overall, I love all different kinds of poetry, and I try to do a lot of different things. I write a lot of prose poetry. I write a lot of free verse. I write a lot of syllabics. I write some formal poetry in the grand, Western tradition, villanelle sonnet, things of that nature. So this, from just a pure technical standpoint, was one interest. In terms of this more recent work, it was a way for me to really push myself into some subject matter that I was not necessarily as comfortable with. That I was going to tell myself I was going to follow the line and I was going to disconnect myself completely from the result. So I write a lot, and what you're seeing is I think the best results from that. But the form for me was really a way to channel a different part of myself. I feel that I'm a different prose poet than I am with my ghazals. And I feel that my ghazals are different than my free verse poems. So I'm occupying a lot of different selves. And this was a way to access a different part of my personality.
I like that a lot because what you're saying is that a different form allows you to be a different writer.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And that a lot of art is about working within the discipline. Mm-hmm. And that word discipline, when we use it, it always sounds bad. Like you're going to be disciplined.
Yeah.
But I think we're using the word incorrectly because it can be a good thing. You can have growth within the discipline of an exercise.
Mhm.
So a ghazal is limiting based on how it's defined, but it gives you the ability to say something you would not have said in a prose poem.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. My prose poems are much more surreal.
Mhm.
And I tend to think of the ghazals as much more almost spiritual in their approach.
Mhm. Which makes perfect sense given the long historical heritage that the ghazals have.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, and so the form really, it feels like it's a straitjacket, but it's in reality forcing you to create a universe that's contained. And
Absolutely.
sometimes having only a limited amount of resources, like you can only have so much, actually forces you to do more than you would if you could just go.
Exactly. It's good to only have a few things to work with and to make yourself do everything that you can with those things. You know, that if you don't have all the resources, then you can maybe be more creative with the ones that you do have.
Essentially being resourceful.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we've gotten to I think we were a little bit past the 30-minute mark. So yeah, I lied earlier. It might be 33, 34 minutes, but what are you gonna do about it? But anyway, so I want to wrap things up. So anyway, I want to thank Mike James for being the first poet, our test guinea pig for this new show and new format for As It Ought to Be and for my students. And again, I want to thank all the students that submitted questions and then all the students who are listening and then have an assignment due based on this. Um, like pay attention to that question I said about what does it mean when you actually hear the poet's voice. This is um, it animates it to a certain extent. So anyway, any last words, Mike?
No, this was a lot of fun. These were great questions. So thank you very much.
All right, so I'm going to sign off. And one more time, thank you again to Mike James. And this has been the first of 5 poetry readings and interviews we're going to do with real living poets, trying to prove my thesis that poetry is alive and vital, and you can actually interact with real poets. So I'm signing off. So thanks again to Mike, and you'll see us again next time with Bunkong Tuan. All right, take care.